name's Mike Miller, and I portray Colonel John Wheeler. Our reenactment unit started approximately a year ago, so we're still in the beginnings of, putting things together and getting an event schedule together. With me, I have Mr. Mike Boyd, who portrays First Sergeant William Babbitt, who was from Valparaiso. I have April Nichols, who's here with me. She portrays Colonel John Wheeler's wife, Ann. Her son, Nick, who portrays JJ. His friend, Matt, who portrays Edgar. And April's mom, Nancy, who basically just joined our reenactment unit. She's going to basically be our cook. She loves cooking out on the open fire with the iron skillets, all that other stuff. And you could see that they're dressed too in their day dresses or camp dresses. Being a Civil War reenactor, it's a bunch of us people who enjoy sharing the history, who wants to keep the memories alive. Okay, we just have this thing about the time period of the Civil War, keeping the memories alive of what the men and the women sacrificed during that time. Everybody has their own favorite time period. Some people love the World War II generation, World War I, or the Renaissance, or the Revolutionary War. We're just Civil War enthusiasts. We love it. You don't have to hold a master's degree or PhD, to be a reenactor. You just need to read up on the Civil War a little and just have general knowledge of it. A lot of us, we're into it so much, we just go beyond that, and we gather all the type of information we can. The reason we decided to do Company B of the 20th Indiana, obviously, is majority of us are from Lake County and the Crown Point area, which Company B came from Lake County. So that's why we decided to do Company B. The history, a lot of people remember, if you talk about Lake County, they'll tell you about the old courthouse, John Dillinger. We used to be the steel capital of the world, but they forget about the Civil War. And there was so much that these men did from Lake County, Porter County, LaPorte County, from this area. People don't realize it. They played a major role in the Civil War. When our nation was divided into two separate entities, they helped restore the Union. So, as again, I portray Colonel Wheeler. I can't look like him. He has a beard, all that, because of my civilian job. I can't wear a beard. So, Colonel Wheeler was born in Connecticut, originally born in Connecticut in 1825, February 6, 1825. In 1847, after being married to his wife Ann for 6 months, his parents, his brothers, moved to Crown Point. They moved in 1834, they moved to Crown Point in 1847, 13 years after Solon Robinson established Crown Point. So 13 years. He was one of the new settlers in the Crown Point area. Only 13 years from the time Solon Robinson arrived. During the summers, he did a lot of farming. In the fall, he would harvest his crops. In the winters, he taught school. Very educated man, a very upfront man, very stand tallish. He told you what he thought. He kept his issues out in the open. He would tell you up front. He was a prime supporter of the new Republican Party. Like Mark stated, he was good friends with Governor Morton, who was the governor at the time during the Civil War. And at one time, he was elected the Lake County surveyor there in Crown Point. John Wheeler and his father actually helped develop the drainage system to drainage the swamplands to start harvesting crops there in Lake County. The colonel and his wife had 2 boys, 1 girl. There's JJ, Edgar, and they had a daughter named Alice. Alice, once she grew up, she eventually married one of the Luthers, and John Luther was a lieutenant in Company B. So Alice and one of Lieutenant Luther's boys married. So again, you know, everybody kind of keeping it in the family. In 1857, J.W. Wheeler, or John Wheeler, and his cousin, Mr. Summers, bought the Lake County Herald. They bought all the equipment from this newspaper. It was getting run into the ground, and they established the Lake County Register. So have you ever heard of the Lake County Register? It was started by Mr. John Wheeler and his cousin. He was the editor-in-chief, and he always put in his beliefs again in his newspaper. He always put what he believed in the newspaper. You know, he wanted to spread the word about the new Republican Party. He started putting his thoughts in the paper about secession and slavery and stuff like that. So, now, so that was John Wheeler. So how did he become Colonel Wheeler? Well, when the war broke out, each state was allowed to raise so many men. Okay, Washington said, Illinois, give me 150 men, 50,000 men. Indiana, give me 75,000 men, what have you. Indiana overexceeded their limit. Okay, well, there was a colonel, Colonel William Brown, who was a veteran of the Mexican War. He wanted to raise a regiment. He went to the governor said, nope, we're turning people back already, you can't do it. Colonel Brown didn't like this. Colonel Brown was from Logansport. He rode to Washington, D.C. He saw Edward Stanton, Secretary of War, and the President. They knew of him and his accomplishments during the Mexican War. They said, go ahead, raise your regiment. So, Colonel Brown wrote 10 men a letter. And these men he knew personally, and some of them he just knew by their reputation. Okay, John Wheeler, being known for his statute and his stance in the community, received one of these letters. This is what the letter stated. Dear sir, hasten and fill up your company. Each one must have 101 men. Send roll as soon as you can, and bring the company as you have the proper number. A less number will not do, and it will be but safe to have a few extra ones. Each company is entitled to 2 musicians. Every man will, if possible, bring with him a blanket of comfort, his ordinary woolen clothing, no fancy, all plain and substantial. Each volunteer honorably discharged will receive, in addition to his pay and clothing, $100 in gold, and no doubt 160 acres of land besides. So if they were lucky enough to survive the war, supposedly they were rewarded with 160 acres of land and $100 in gold. I'm still researching to see if that actually happened. Okay, so that was the letter they sent. Colonel Brown sent to 10 men within northern Indiana, some in central Indiana. John Wheeler, using his own money, his own influence, raised 101 men from the Lake County area. They met on the north side of the old courthouse to say their final goodbyes, and they went to Lafayette. At Lafayette, they mustered in as the 20th Indiana, Company B. Originally, Colonel Wheeler enlisted as a private, but the Crown Point men or the Lake County men said, no, you brought us here, you're going to be in charge of us, okay? So he was elected their captain. Now, tells a lot about John Wheeler. He had no military experience. He's never been to a military school, but just because of his nature and they knew what type of guy he was, they elected him as captain. Because you got to remember, it's not like today when you enlist in the armed forces, you go wherever and you're, side by side with people from all over the United States. And these guys lived together, went to church together, had socials together, hung out the hardware store together. They knew each other. They've known each other for years. So, 20th Indiana was then formed. You had 10 companies. Company A was from Miami County. Company B was from Lake County. Company C was from Marshall County. Company D was from Fountain County. Company E, LaPorte County. Company F, Cass County. Company G, Tippecanoe County. Company H, Marion County. Company I, Porter County. That's your area. They were Company I of the 20th. Company K was from White County. Okay? So, that was the 20th Indiana. Now, as the war went on, obviously they had to get replacements and stuff, and you started getting soldiers from different parts of the state or some other states. Okay? For instance, our first sergeant, he was originally from Porter County, Valparaiso. He just happened to fall in with Company B. Okay? So after that, they mustered in at Camp Tippecanoe in Lafayette. They started getting used to the military life, doing some drilling. Then they moved to Indianapolis, Camp Morton. And this is July, the time frame is July 1861. They went to Camp Morton, Camp Morton, named after the governor of the state of Indiana. Started more drilling, getting used to the military life. The 20th Indiana had a reputation, as they went through the war, as being hotheads, as having an attitude, I guess you could say. And it started at Camp Morton. And what happened is, when they were slotted to get their equipment, they lined up to get issued their equipment. Now, here being a brand new private, right into the Army, well, they want the blue suit, they want the new musket, the infield. Well, they got issued state militia jackets, old state militia jackets, that didn't even resemble the blue suit.
They were gray too, weren't they?
Yeah, they were gray
jackets.
And they got old flintlock muskets that were converted to the ball, to the percussion ball rifle. So they got hand-me-downs. They didn't like this. They started to yell. They started to fight. A riot almost broke out. Colonel Brown and some of his men had to ride to the Capitol to get Governor Morton, some of his men, to bring him down to the camp. Hey, my fellas, they're going crazy. You got to do something about this. So the governor, he diffused the situation, told him, look, I'll do the best I can. Take this right now, and we'll try to straighten it out. Well, they still weren't really satisfied, so that night, all these men who had these flintlock switched over weapons to musket and ball, piled them in front of the officers' quarters. So when the officers woke up and came out of their tents, here was all these weapons piled up. The citizens of Indianapolis heard about this, and they weren't happy. Why are our soldiers being problem childs? When it was time for the 20th Indiana to hit the rail cars to go out east, they knew, and the citizens were so angry, they couldn't march through the streets of Indianapolis. They had to actually run through the streets of Indianapolis because the civilians were so mad at them, throwing stuff at them, stuff like that. And it is recorded the first death of a soldier from the 20th Indiana was from that run through Indianapolis. He died of heat stroke while running through the streets of Indianapolis to the train yard. So the regiment heads out east, and they get railroad duty, guarding some railroad ammunition dumps, have a few skirmishes here and there. Real fast, I'm going to go over a whole history of the battles the 20th was engaged in, so you could get an idea that these men from our area played a major role in these major battles. they helped, with restoring our Union. But they were out at Newport News, Virginia, Second Bull Run, the Oak Grove, the Orchards, Chantilly, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, and they were present at Appomattox Courthouse when Lee surrendered. So they've got a long battle history. Now, when they went out to the East Coast in Virginia, at Newport News, Virginia, they were the only Army-based troops that were stationed on the coast, and they witnessed the battle between the ironclads, the Merrimack and the Monitor. They were the only regiment out there on the coast who witnessed that. And it must have been a great sight to see. Even though devastating, it must have been a great sight to see. So they also witnessed other naval battles, the sinking of the USS Congress and the USS Cumberland. And in fact, when the Cumberland sank, men of the 20th ran offshore into the sea to help the survivors from both the North and the South back on the shore. The second string of bad luck for the men of the 20th, after these naval battles, some Union ships come in, they've got their new supplies. They've got the nice Union blue suit, they've got the infield muskets, they've got the blue overcoats. The regimental quartermaster says, all right guys, offload this and we'll issue it in the morning. So they offload all these ships with all these crates of equipment, go to bed. What happens that night? They have hurricane-type weather. Washes all these crates back into the sea. So once again, there goes their stuff. So eventually, January of that year, 1861, January of 1862, they got issued all their new stuff. So Colonel Wheeler, during the Second Battle of Bull Run, I believe it was, he was shot in the instep, in the foot. And then his horse was also shot up underneath him. He had 3 horses shot from underneath him during his entire service in the Civil War. The 7-day battle, he was so sick he couldn't even get out of his tent. So, he had a couple of strings of bad luck himself to where he couldn't participate in a battle. But once he was promoted to colonel, he did lead him in Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg, I believe it was. And you have to, I'm still a little nervous talking in front of people, so you got to give me a couple yattaboys, I think.
Attaboy, Colonel.
Thank you. But Gettysburg, when you think of the Civil War, everybody thinks of Gettysburg. And I love researching Gettysburg. It was the battle that changed the war. It was the greatest victory for the Union. It was the greatest loss for the South. And if you just analyze this battle and you think about if Lee could have had this happen or he would have let this happen, who knows what it would be like today, because he could have won that war or that battle hands down. And if a lot of you don't know, the actual battle of Gettysburg started as a mistake. They, both commanders didn't even want to have a fight, but some Confederates, they heard there were some shoes in the town of Gettysburg, so they sent some units down there to get shoes, and they ran into some Union troops. That's how it started. There was some fighting in Gettysburg itself, the actual town, but majority of the battle was south of Gettysburg. And the 20th Indiana did not go into battle until the second day. And like Mark said, they were stationed or they were put in at the Rosewoods. I never heard of the Rosewood until I started doing research on the 20th Indiana and all that. When you hear about Gettysburg, you hear about Little Round Top. Cemetery Ridge, the Union Center, Pickett's Charge, Culp's Hill, stuff like that. And when I heard they were at the Rosewood, I said, what's the Rosewood? But it was a piece of land owned by the family of the name of Rose. And if you ever look at the map of Gettysburg, you know it's an inverted fishhook. You have Culp's Hill, you have Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, which encompasses the Union Center, the brick wall, Devil's Den, then the two round tops, Big Round Top, Little Round Top. Just north of Devil's Den is the Rosewood. It's a kind of heavy, sparsely patch of woods where the 20th went in. In front of them was a field which they called the Rose Field. Okay, so the 20th went into position there in the Rosewood. The second day of battle. The night before, Colonel John Wheeler wrote his wife for the last time, and this is his letter. Thursday morning, July 2nd, 4 o'clock a.m. Dear wife and children, we arrived here last night at 9 o'clock. The 1st Corps had a fight here yesterday. Major General Reynolds was killed. Our whole army is here now, and we move on them this morning. I shall give this to someone who does not go into battle so that you will probably get it. It may be my last letter to you. If so, believe that my last prayer for you is that God may bless you all. I believe we will whip them finally before the sun goes down. We met women, children, men, and all flying for safety last night and scared to death. Some and a handbox. Some a valise, and some were in wagons and buggies, others on horseback. All said, hurry up. We had a hard march of 10 miles. We left Emmitsburg at 4 p.m. Once more adieu, your affectionate husband, John Wheeler. So, that was his last letter to his wife. So, the 20th goes into battle. They're in the Rosewoods. Just being north of Devil's Den, from what I read, the Rosewoods, sparsely kind of heavy woods, still had some boulders on the ground. You know, they're about 6 to 8 inches high. To where, you know, if you look at our shoes, we have hobnails, we don't have rubber soles. So the men, it's hard for them to, you know, if you're running, stay away from the boulders or you'll slip on them if you hit them. Same thing with horseback. You're weaving in and out of the boulders. That's what the colonel was doing. He was weaving out through these boulders, through the woods, saber in the air, directing this line of battle. Then there was a shot that ran out. Colonel Wheeler was shot off his horse. The shot hit his neck, went through the jugular, came out his back. Died instantly, fell off his horse, obviously. Lieutenant Luther, who was a friend of the colonel's, knew each other in Crown Point, both businessmen, saw this. Lieutenant Luther went over to the colonel's body, wrapped him in a blanket, tears in his eyes, carried him to the rear, put him in a shallow grave, and marked it until he could be removed to get shipped back home, and which eventually did happen. So that's how Colonel Wheeler, expired, second day of the battle. The third day of the battle, now, during that second day of battle in the Rosewoods, the 20th was going against some tough opponents from General Hood and the Alabamians and the Georgians, and they held them off. The third day of battle, the 20th got moved to the Union Center. Now, we all remember what happened on the third day, right? Of Gettysburg. Pickett's Charge. And where did Pickett's Charge take place? The Union Center. Because at first, they didn't think a third day of battle was going to happen because it was so hot. But Pickett's Charge went straight up the middle to the Union Center. 20th Indiana was there. Helped defeat Pickett's Charge. There was a young man from Company B, Oliver P. Rode, who won the Medal of Honor. He was the only Medal of Honor winner from Company B. 19 years old. He was born in Kentucky, moved to Indiana, enlisted in Terre Haute into Company B. He received the Medal of Honor for capturing the 21st. I'm still researching on how exactly what happened, what events took place. If you read his citation, all it says is he captured the 21st North Carolina flag during the Battle of Gettysburg at Pickett's Charge, during Pickett's Charge. So I don't know if he actually jumped over the wall, saw the flag, and grabbed it out of the guy's hand, or the flag bearer got killed and he went over and grabbed the flag. I have no idea. So we do have a Medal of Honor winner. Here's a letter or the memoirs of the colonel's father. Writes about when he heard of the colonel's death. The mail on the 5th brought the news that John was killed at the Battle of Gettysburg. He had participated in all the battles in General McClellan's retreat from the Chickamauga. Had his horse shot under him at the Second Bull Run battle where his colonel was killed. He also fought at the Chantilly, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. He had been promoted to the post of colonel and had command of the regiment at the time of his death. A rifle shot passed through his neck, severing the jugular vein and parting the spine. He fell from his horse dead without a struggle. The Masons and Oddfellows, him being a member of both fraternities, had his remains brought to Crown Point, where his burial was attended by a very large assemblage, for he was a general favorite with them all. So, everybody, he was a prominent man in the Crown Point area. Again, the 20th Indiana, after the Battle of Gettysburg, they went up to New York, and if you remember anything about history, when the draft happened, they started to have riots in New York. 20th Indiana was shipped up there to stop the riots in New York. But as the war went on, they eventually ended up at Appomattox Courthouse at the surrender of Lee. So, us as reenactors, we want to keep that history alive. We love telling all the information we know. Like I said, we don't have master's degrees. We're not professional historians, and we just, well, except you. But we do our best. We do our best. We try to do proper research, and we do living histories and reenactments, and we do stuff like this. I'm getting used to talking in front of people, so a reenactment basically, and I'm sure a lot of you've seen them. We get all dressed up, we go out there and we shoot at each other and have a reenactment battle. We set up camp to where the public come around camp, ask questions, see the stuff we have. We try to be authentic as possible, but in reality, there's no way you could be 100% authentic, with today's times and stuff. Because if we were really authentic, half the camp would be out with the fever or diarrhea, or, you know what I mean?
And no, we don't use real bullets.
No. So, we also do living histories, which we just set up camp. The public, they're, at a festival, what have you, they come, they walk through our camp, ask questions, we'll try to answer them to the best of our abilities, stuff like that. Then we do presentations like this, Like I said, our unit right now has about 9 soldiers right now in it. Obviously, we all couldn't make it here today. It's a family-oriented group. We have women, we have children in our group. Basic reenacting, it's a little expensive to start. You really got to be into the hobby to get into it, because this stuff does cost some money. But we don't expect everybody to get it all at once. Take your time, get what you can, and we're still looking for volunteers to pick up the rifle. If you have a son or your husband and his son wants to think about doing something like this, the general rule, if you're 16 and above, the boy could go on the battlefield under a parent's consent and being watched by an adult. So at 16, they step onto the battlefield. If they're under 16, basically they stay on the sidelines or carry water buckets, what have you. So this hobby, you know, it's a very large hobby throughout the United States, and we also have our own magazine for anybody that's interested. It's Camp Chase Gazette. It's for Civil War reenactors. It talks anything from research to what the preservation groups are doing to regular reenactors writing articles about what they found out, and then they talk about some reenactments that are coming up. Because 2011 to 2015, all that's the 150th year of the Civil War. So Civil War is kind of coming back into the public's eye. So that's basically all I have. Anybody have any questions?
Have you ever been to Colonel Wheeler's monument in Gettysburg?
No. We're, as a group, we're planning to try to go down there in 2013. And Mike's been to Gettysburg. We have a couple other people who's been to Gettysburg. But as a unit, you know, because each year when they do the reenactment, they don't do it on the actual battlefield these days like they did the movie. But at least we want to go down there for the reenactment and have us get on the actual rosewood and stand in the position that they were at.
Yeah, because they have a nice monument.
Right, I've seen pictures and all that other stuff.
Yeah, have you ever seen the thing that's on West Street in Valpo for the 9th Indiana?
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Yeah. Well, and there's also a plaque on the north side of the old courthouse, and I believe it was the old Post Tribune building. There's a brass plate, because that's where Company B assembled. That's where the Lake County men assembled before they went down to Lafayette. So.
Is there a Civil War roundtable in this area?
No. Maybe we should start one.
Yeah, sure.
There you go, Mike.
So, any other questions?
I didn't have a question. I was gonna say that field of stones and rocks,
Uh-huh.
some of those, they were not gonna be able to run over. You had to go around them.
Oh yeah, especially when you got up to Devil's Den. Yeah.
That whole area on the Gettysburg battlefield is just
Right.
covered with rocks everywhere you go. The farm fields themselves are actually cultivated where the farmers had taken the rocks out and built the small stone walls, demarcating their property, but there's boulders and rocks everywhere out there. And Devil's Den itself is an incredible natural structure that they fought in and around and over. I don't know how they did it, but they did.
So, yeah, so, you know, we constantly still try to research. Mark's helped us out a lot, especially when we first started. And he heard about us. He's like, hey, I have some stuff for you. So we met Mark a couple times, so he's been a great help to us. So, any other questions?
You know, if you haven't been to the Lincoln Forum in Gettysburg, you ought to consider that.
Yeah.
It's November 16th through the 18th every year, no matter what days that falls on.
Right.
And the reason for that is so that anybody that wants to stay over for November 19th can see the reading of the Gettysburg Address at the site that Lincoln gave it in
Oh, cool.
1863, November 19th.
Right.
So,
Well, you know, obviously, with us reenactors, you know, this is a hobby. We give the time that we can. There's nothing mandatory. And, you know, we all have civilian jobs. Like I work Tuesdays through Saturdays, you know, so a lot of times I have to ask for a day off or switch with somebody to come out on Saturday when we're doing a reenactment or something. So, and obviously, you know, going to Gettysburg as a unit, you're talking about time off from work, the financial burden of it. So, you know, hopefully we could get it put together and all go down there as a unit. Also, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Oh, but this is me.
Oh, this was yours? Okay. I've never seen this. We're going to research this, and it was called a
Frozen Betsy.
Frozen
Frozen Betsy.
Frozen Betsy. and her great-great-grandfather,
Uncle.
uncle, wore it during the Civil War. And some type of maybe love pendant or what have you, but we're
Well,
gonna
my
try.
mother said it was in something called a sachet, so that's
A
all I
sachet?
know.
Okay, but that's interesting. I've never seen anything like that. Mike, who's been doing this for ages, never heard of it, and she's even got the original note about it. So that's awesome. And you know, that's one good thing about talking to groups like this, because everybody has. Here's another one. Everybody know if they know a lot about their own family heritage and stuff. They may have little.
When he was
Stuff.
from Indiana.
Oh,
Oh, okay, cool. First Sergeant Boyd, he's going to be talking about the uniform, the life of the Civil War soldier, and the equipment. We also have stuff on display for afterwards if you guys want to take a look at it. We have a pair of original Civil War binoculars and a original tintype, which is a picture. But first, Miss Nichols.
Let him go first. If there's time, I'll talk about us
Okay.
women, because we always get pushed to the side as usual.
All right.
We
So,
sacrifice more to the men than the men did.
all right. First Sergeant.
Hi, everybody. I'm the crazy one in the group. I've been reenacting for years and years. This will be, I think, my 7th year. I originally started with a group called the 49th Indiana, which are out of Indianapolis. And we portray mostly the Western soldiers, the units that fought in the West, not so much in the East.
The bummers.
Exactly. I actually had 2 relatives who were in Sherman's March to the Sea. So most of I have 6 relatives that were in the Civil War, and all of them were Indiana and Illinois soldiers, and all fought in the West. That was always primarily my biggest interest. When I read about Mike starting up this group here in Lake County, I had to jump all over it. I'm from Lake County, my family's from Lake County, and nothing gives me more honor than portraying an Indiana soldier. People forget the sacrifices and the contribution that Indiana made to the war. Indiana soldiers were everywhere in the war. It's something to look on now and be proud of. People forget about Indiana. They think we're just a Midwestern state full of corn. And, you know, Indiana soldiers, you had Indiana soldiers in the Iron Brigade, which is one of the most famous units in the war. You had Indiana soldiers in the Lightning Brigade. Eli Lilly was from Indiana. Dr. Gatling invented the Gatling gun, which then moved on to the modern machine gun, is from Indiana. So you really have to look, and we forget these days how much Indiana gave to the war. So when I found out that I could now portray an Eastern Lake County soldier right here at home, I was all over it. So, like I said, I've been doing this for about 7 years now. I've gone through some really crazy reenactments. We've done hardcore events where we go out in the woods and they've dropped us 20 miles in the woods in Tennessee, threw our gear at us and said, "See you on Sunday." And we had to camp and live like soldiers in the woods and march our way out. So we really have tried to understand what it was that these guys went through, how they lived, what the hardships were all the time. Yes, I'm crazy. I won't do it again. But those are the events that you're miserable while they're going on, and suddenly 2 weeks later you wake up and say, "Wow, that was the coolest thing I've ever done in my life." So I'm going to open it up some. I just wanted to talk more about the gear, the equipment, what the soldiers carried on all the time, and feel free to ask any questions you want anytime. I'm happy to answer and go into things because questions will come up as I explain stuff, etc. On top of that, I am kind of an amateur historian. I've been studying the Civil War my whole life. My grandfather was a World War II vet, so I grew up with that respect for veterans and everything. My father was a black powder shooter, hunter, and buckskinner who liked to portray the trappers of the early 1800s. He shot at Friendship. I camped in teepees my whole young life. So history's been ingrained in me. I've been to most of the Civil War major battlefields and many of the minors. quite a few of them multiple times. I think when you study these battles and you read about stuff, it only really makes sense to finally go out there and walk that ground and see through the soldiers' eyes what they were looking at. And it changes your perspective on everything. It's one thing to read about a musket engagement with 58 caliber rifles going on at 50 yards and think about it while you're reading it, and then to stand there and look at how close they were, hammering away at each other and not giving up and not moving it. It's really powerful. So, I guess we can start with the weapons. Well, as Mike started at the beginning, originally, before the rifled musket came about, the standard U.S. rifle was the 1842 Springfield smoothbore musket. This doesn't have rifling, there's no sights, you just point. So it's a smoothbore, which means it's not nearly as accurate as a rifle. And the reason that the military used smoothbores, we did have rifles all the way back to the 1700s, but they were extremely hard to load. Because to load a rifle ball, you had to have a patch, you had to hammer it in, you had to hammer it down even more, take your ramrod out, hammer it all the way down the barrel, then go through the whole process. Yes, it was accurate, but it took too much time. And that's why we came about with fighting in large groups, lines. Accuracy wasn't important, it was how much fire you could put on the enemy all at once. So you'd line up 1,000 men, and you'd tell them all to fire at one time, and you had 1,000 musket balls going down range all at once. Who cares how accurate that is? You don't want to be in front of that. So the smoothbore muskets could load very, very easily because it was just a round ball dropped on a round tube. They would take a cartridge out, they'd pour the powder in, they'd put the ball in there, roll right down to the bottom, cap it. You don't even have to look, you could just turn your head and fire. What came about in the late 1850s was a French colonel, Jean, invented the Minet ball, which we now call the mini ball. It's not the true name, but that's what it's come to be called. And what that did was to take the rifle, which had the rifling, which would stabilize the ball, and make the rifle far more accurate. What the mini ball did was you could now load the rifle just as fast as a smoothbore, because the mini ball that he invented had a hollow base. This is the 58 caliber mini ball that Civil War soldiers shot at each other for 4 years. It's 1 ounce 58 caliber lead ball. And that's when we were talking about the damage that these do is unbelievable. In fact, people think they're archaic. They look at these weapons and think they're trite because they're black powder weapons. They're from the 1860s. I've had people ask me, you could really hurt somebody with those? They don't get it. And to me, that 58 caliber musket is probably one of the best man killers ever made. More people have been put in graves with black powder rifles than anything else by far. You think of the wars in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars, the Civil War, they're very effective. So the mini ball has a hollow base. So what this ball is undersized, and it will drop down the board just like a smoothbore ball. But what happens is when the powder ignites behind this hollow base, it will expand into the rifling, grab it, twist, and go. So what the military did was take the quick loading smoothbores and give it the accuracy of the rifle with the mini ball. And this was the huge technological advance of the time. We look at these rifles today, like I said, and think they're trite. This was the M16 of its day. This was the highest technology out there. This was, people would look at that and say, that is unbelievable where technology is taking us these days. So, the #1 rifle, over 1 million of these were made right here in the United States by a bunch of contractors. This is a model 1861 U.S. Springfield 58 caliber rifle. This was issued to most of the U.S. troops, and then the Confederates would pick them up from the dead Union soldiers and use them themselves because they were better than the smoothbores that the Confederates were carrying. So they would pick up the muskets. Both armies, North and South, used more Springfields than any other rifle in the war, which is kind of ironic seeing it's a U.S.-made rifle and the Confederates used just as many of them as we did. Actually, I can pass this around if you guys want to see the mini ball. So that's the 1861 Springfield. Number 2 used was the British Enfield musket, which was also a 58 caliber. I gotta take this apart. And these were imported from England. It's the same principle, it's the same type of weapon, but it's a British-made rifle. And the US imported just as many of these as they pretty much used. They were highly looked upon, people loved them. They thought they were very well made, very accurate, and they were. And the Confederates used a bunch of these too because they were running the blockades to import them, trading cotton for rifles to England. So this was the #1 arm of the Confederate armies, followed by the Springfields that they had picked up. The US used just as many of these as the Confederates did because when the war started, we only had a standing army of 16,000 men. Suddenly the South succeeds and takes 4,000 of those men with them because a bunch of US soldiers were not going to fight against their home. So now the US Army is 12,000 men, and they have 12,000 smoothbore muskets. And suddenly we're at war with each other. And within a year, both armies, the United States Army went from 12,000 to 1,000,000. We needed guns, and we needed them fast. We could crank out as many as we wanted from the Springfield armories and all the contractors, but it wasn't enough. So we were buying them anywhere we could get them. And that's the N-Series is the #1 imported rifle from both sides during the war, and that's the British rifle. Second only to the British rifle, and the rifle that I carry with the 49th Indiana, because it's what we were issued, is the 1858 Austrian Lorenz. Now this is the same type of weapon again, but this was being imported from Austria. And people forget about the Austrian Lorenz. They think everything the Springfields and Enfields. 250,000 of these rifles came into the country during the Civil War and were used by both sides as well. And the quality of these varied depending on the shady importers that you would get who would buy garbage rifles and sell them to the US government to make a buck. But a lot of them were really good and a lot of guys liked their Lorenzes. I personally really like it. It's a bit shorter. It's a nice design, same caliber. So these were pretty prominent as well. Still though, half the armies, especially in the South, were using the smoothbore musket. And one of the big loads that they were using at the time, because of the way warfare was fought up close, the average Civil War engagement was 70 yards. So they didn't engage much further than that. So if you have a musket that shoots a good 100 yards, that's good enough. And that's why they could still fight, even against armies that were using 58 caliber muskets and rifles at that. There's a lot of argument in the scholarship about how much the rifle actually changed warfare, because if you really look and study, you'll find that the officers didn't realize the technology that they had, and the men weren't trained to use their rifles effectively. So the sights on them weren't used. Soldiers were never brought out to the range and taught how to shoot. A lot of the movies, you'll hear officers telling them to aim low, aim low. This is because they would raise the back sight and shoot 300-yard volleys, and they'd forget to lower it. And a mini ball has an elliptical flight path. It goes up and it comes back down. So you'll get a safe zone in between because the ball actually goes up before it comes back down, so that the officers would tell the men to aim low, thereby hitting guys pretty much on the head when they're aiming at their belt buckles, because the men weren't trained. None of them were ever taken out really and taught how to shoot. They joined the Army, they were given a uniform and a rifle and said go. Now what the Confederates did, which was a big American innovation, actually during the Revolutionary War, is they used what was called buck and ball. And this is the smoothbore 69 caliber musket. What they would do then is load the big round ball, and on top of that, they would put 3 30 caliber buckshot. So basically you had a shotgun with one big ball and 3 little 30 cals on top of it. You think of a company of 100 men with 100 smoothbore muskets, all firing at once. 400 projectiles are now going down range from those 100 men. Within 50 yards, it was devastatingly effective. So the Confederates could still stand up and fight with the technology that they had because of what I was saying. We didn't understand how to use the rifles at the time. If we would have taught our men to aim, to use their sights properly, we could have been engaging Confederates with smoothbores at 300 yards where they couldn't hit us past 100. But the officers didn't learn. They didn't realize it, and we still got up close, 50 yards away, and hammered away at each other. And that's why the war was so bloody. Not so much the rifles, but the tactics that were used at the time. This is basically what the cartridges look like. You would have your powder, and then the ball is in the top of the cartridge. And you would carry 40 of them in a cartridge box like this. The standard issue for a soldier going into battle was 40 rounds. 40 rounds in your cap box, and they'd expect you to fight with that all day long. Soldiers learned real fast that didn't work. So they would put another 20 or 40 in their pockets and more in their knapsacks if they could get them. So basically, this is what the cartridge looked like. You would pull a cartridge out of your box, and one of the main requirements to be in the United States Army was you had to have your 2 front teeth. And that's so you could bite the cartridge and tear it off. If you didn't have your teeth, you couldn't load your weapon. And that was the standard procedure. You didn't tear it with your hands, you bit it with your teeth, and you tore it off. Then you would take the ball out, pour the powder down the gun, put the ball on top, take the rammer out, ram the ball down on top of the powder charge, open up the cap box, take out your copper cap, which now you put on. Everything's loaded. You cock it, you put your cap on, you'd wait for the orders because you were firing in volleys. You'd aim, and then you'd fire. You'd do this again. Captain would say load, and the men would now go through the same process again. Put the ball in, take the rammer out, ram it down, and go through the whole process again. Now, one of the anachronisms that you'll see sometimes in the movies, etc., is the guys will take the rammer and stick it in the ground and stand there and keep firing. So it's right here. You don't have to take it in and out of the rifle every time. That was absolutely not the case during the Civil War. Because if those Confederates came out of their line and they overran you and you took off and you left this sticking in the ground, you have a big club, and that's all you got because you can't load it now. So every time the soldiers were taught, return that rammer before anything. Every time you're bringing it down, you're removing the rammer and you're putting it back again. That was the nature of the way they fought. So, basically the standard issue, I have some more weapons too, actually. Pistols were a new thing at the time that were just coming out. We had the first revolvers being invented by John Colt, or Colonel Colt. Not John, what was his name? Samuel Colt, that's it. He came up with the idea of the revolver, 6 shots without reloading, which was amazing. I mean, this was a huge technological advancement during the time. The first ones came out actually in the 1840s, and then he would keep refining his design, and it moved on to the 1851 Navy, which is a 36 caliber. By the time of the Civil War, he had come up with the 1860 Army, which is a 44 caliber revolver. So these are all loaded still. They're called muzzle loaders. Even though you're not going down the muzzle, you're loading the cylinder individually with powder and a ball 6 times, and then you have to cap each cylinder before you can fire. So at first Bull Run, a lot of Northern soldiers had pistols. They would buy them for themselves. They thought they were going to go out, be tough, take their pistols with them. After the first engagement, nobody had a pistol anymore because they're no good past 25 yards. You're not going to use it. Plus, how much time do you have to reload 6 cylinders while that line over there is firing at you and you're down on the ground saying, hold on, just, So basically you had your 6 shots and that was it. Once you used your 6, they were gone. So the cavalry used these type of weapons. And to the cavalry, the pistols were actually secondary. If you look at the way a cavalry soldier is set up, his saber is on this side, and his pistol is on this side. And that's because your saber is your primary weapon in your right hand. You get up close and you use your saber. The pistol is for last ditch, because you've only got 6 shots. You're not going to reload that on the running horse in the midst of a battle as well. So it was a last ditch weapon up close. If you had no other choice, you could pull your pistol and you had 6 shots to save yourself up close. And that was all they had. Soldiers did take them into battle at first and they threw them away, like I said. Plus, on top of it, when you see everything that a soldier carries, you want to carry another 5 pounds on you, feel free. I've marched 10 miles with all this gear on me, and it is I would throw a pistol away too. Because any extra little weight you get makes a huge difference. Standard equipment for the war, and I'm a first sergeant, but I'm still dressed just like the infantry soldier. I would still carry a musket. I would probably never fire, because the first sergeant is actually behind the line, directing his company, and watching the men, making sure they're following the orders. He would listen to the captain. Actually, the colonel would be even further back. The captain would command the company. First sergeant would carry out the orders and make sure the men were doing what they do. But I'm still in the standard issue gear. So you'd have your cap box, which is your 40, or your cartridge box, which is your 40 rounds. Plus I have more rounds in my pocket, because I'm not just having 40. Then you've got all your caps right here. This is called a cap box. On the other side, you have your bayonet, which also was almost never used in the Civil War. They just didn't get that close. Absolutely, there were engagements. Hand-to-hand combat did happen. Guys did stick each other with bayonets. But a bayonet was more an intimidation weapon. And it's one of those things where I've been in reenactments, I've seen guys do it, and when there's a line of 100 men bearing down on you with bayonets, you're not sticking around. It's just your nature to leave. And that was the point of the bayonet, was to intimidate people out of positions, not to get up and stick them. A wall of those coming at you is very, very intimidating. And if they're running and screaming, and powder is going, and smoke, and battle, and adrenaline, you're not going to stand there and let them stick you. You're going to go. So that's how the bayonet was used. Mostly the number one use for these, throw it in the ground, stick a candle in it. You got a candle holder at night. And it works. We do it all the time. So it's another one of those things. You had your canteen, which was a tin canteen. Actually, mine is lined with beeswax, which will make the water taste a little bit sweeter. So depending on where you got your water, it was nice to have that beeswax lining. Then you had your haversack. Now this was for food and eating utensils only. It's not for carrying books, it's not for carrying a spare set of gloves. Lots of reenactors will do that, but that's not what they were used for. You were issued a tin boiler, which is your cup. You make your coffee in it in the morning. We do it the old style, where I'll take just coffee beans out with me, throw them on a rock, take the musket butt and crush them up, throw those in the cup with some water and boil it. Then you take your spoon, you scrape off the coffee, and you drink it. So it's good stuff. I actually love camp coffee though. It's grown on me. Inside the haversack, which was tarred canvas to keep the water off. Soldiers would be issued hardtack, which is this bread right there. That was the Army cracker. They call them crackers. And it was a very hard bread issued to the soldiers that could sustain them if needed be. They would be issued hardtack, salt pork, coffee beans, molasses. Those were the staples. On top of that, sometimes they would be issued dried desiccated vegetables. They could get soft cheese, soft bread if the Army had it. We, being federal soldiers, were lucky because we always had what we needed. Very rarely did Union troops go without food or without gear like the Confederate soldiers did, who were really, really affected by the blockades, by their lack of industry, their farms being destroyed. There just wasn't much for the Confederate soldiers to eat and survive on sometimes. The Union soldiers had it good. So inside you have your tin plate. Everything was tin. So that's to eat off of. You have your tin cup and your tin plate. Then I have period silverware. These are called poke bags, and this is what you put your food in. They'd issue you salt pork, you throw it in a bag, wrap it up, and you put it in your haversack. They issue hardtack, throw it in a bag, put it in your haversack. And usually rations were issued for 3 days. Then you had your silverware, which was brought from home, bought, sometimes issued. This is like an army issued tin spoon. These are actually period, these are from the late 1860s. And that was the 3-tined fork at the time and the knife that you would carry with you everywhere you went. I'll pass this around. This is actually dated 1868. And it's still sharp. It blows me away, the quality of some of the stuff that was made back then. That knife is still sharp. Now everything else that the soldier had was carried in a knapsack. This is fun to wear on your back all day long too. And basically over the shoulder, and this would snap back here. So right now what I'm wearing and all this is everything that a US soldier would go into the field with and fight with. This was your whole life. You didn't have anything more than this. And those are the type of events where we have fun, where we go into the field with this, and that's it. And survive for a few days and see what it's like to walk around with everything you own on your back. On the top of the knapsack is my greatcoat, which was the US issue cold weather coat. It's a big heavy wool coat, goes all the way to my knees. And as soon as it got warm, US soldiers threw them away because they knew come next winter they'd get issued a new one. And they'd say, don't throw your coat away, that's part of your gear. And they said, yeah, whatever. And they'd throw it away because they're not going to carry it. That's another like 5 pounds on your back. And believe me, when you're out there and you're doing it all the time, weight means everything. You're marching 15 miles a day, 5 pounds is a huge difference after 3 hours of marching. So anything they didn't need, they constantly throw away. And that was the luck of being a federal soldier. Like I said, we'd always get reissued new gear. If we needed it, we could get it. Inside the knapsack, some of the soldiers, what they do after, as the war went on, they'd realize the straps cutting into their shoulders would get to be really irritating. They'd throw the knapsack away, and they'd get rid of everything in it. And all they would take is their blanket, their shelter half tent, their gum blanket, one shirt, one spare shirt, and an extra pair of socks. And they'd roll that into a big, long cylinder, wrap it around them, and tie it together. It's called a blanket roll. And that was an easier way to carry your stuff, and that was really getting rid of everything. But these guys, after being in the field 2 and 3 years, they didn't need anything to survive. They wouldn't even put tents up. If it rained, they'd sleep outside. They didn't care. They were so worn out and used to being out in the field that it became second nature. And it's one of the funny things that I've realized doing reenacting, us in the modern world today, we've become soft. We really don't realize how much you can put up with and deal with. And you get out there, I did the one event in Tennessee, where I was out in the woods for 3 days, and it was early March, and it was probably 50 degrees, and it rained on us about 70% of the time. And we still marched, had picket lines, we fought a couple of battles, because there was a Confederate unit out there too, that they had pitted against us, so we kept bumping into them. We would set up camp, we'd strike fires, we'd build breastworks. Then I got put on picket duty, which went from 9 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm standing out in the dark, in the rain, in the Tennessee woods, 45 degrees, and it was one of those moments where I'm sitting there going, what is wrong with me? My wife is at home right now on the couch, and I'm like, oh, what is wrong with me? After picket duty, I walked back into camp and was relieved. This was at 3 in the morning, and it was raining, cold rain, and I walked up to the sentry fire, and I laid down on the leaves, and I fell asleep. Right out in the cold and the rain, you were so exhausted and so worn out that it didn't even matter. And that's what these guys did all the time. They didn't bother with tents. They'd get rid of everything they could all the time. But still, you were issued a tent. You were issued a gum blanket, which the soldiers loved. These were the one thing that they loved for everything. It's a piece of canvas that's tarred or rubbered. And you could always put this on the ground to keep the moisture off the ground, something to lay on. You could put it up as a little shelter. You could wear it around you as a raincoat if need be, which is what I did in Tennessee, standing up there like this. This was almost the most prized piece of gear. This will do for you so much. You cannot be without your gun blanket. And every soldier kept their gun blanket. Then you were issued what was called a shelter half, which was 1/2 of a tent. And what you did, you carried half and your file partner carried half. So the two of you could put it together and make a simple A dog tent if need be. But again, like I said, most of the guys didn't do it. They'd either throw it away or they would use it as an extra blanket or, you know, just to string up a shelter to keep the sun off of them when they weren't marching. And this was the standard issue U.S. shelter half tent. That's it. I'm not going to unwrap it and everything, but it's real thin canvas. It's made to be as light as can be, and it's just one more piece of gear. And then on top of that, you were issued the U.S. Army wool blanket. And this is what all the guys carried, and it is not comfortable. You can pass that around and see how rough and harsh it is, but that was what the soldiers were issued. That was their blanket through all cold weather, through rain, snow. That's all you had. So yeah, that's a lot of fun too. And then on top of that, I carry a spare pair of socks, an extra shirt, the U.S. Army issue shirt, which was a muslin white shirt. Most of the guys didn't wear those. They'd get homespun shirts sent from home. And actually, there's a girl in my unit down south who hand sews all the shirts, period correct and period patterns, with bone and wood buttons. So these are like the homespun shirts. She makes them in the style and patterns of the time. So that you have your suspenders. You've got your issue wool pants. The reason these are light blue, when the war started, regulation was dark blue, just like the jackets. And then they started realizing how many men were in the Army, and they started to realize how much dye cost. And if you took a pair of wool pants and you dipped them only 4 times to this color, instead of 8 times to this color, well, you can dye twice as many pants. So it was a cost-saving measure that they went to the sky blue trousers. And that's the only reason. There was no rhyme or reason. It was to save money on dye. You dip these half the amount of times that you dip the dark blue. So yeah, that's, then I have a couple of, is it blankets still going around? Yeah. Some of the Confederate jackets I have, because occasionally I'll put on gray. I know it's scary. Just every now and then, sometimes units will need more Confederates, and the 49th Indiana has a sister unit that's out of Indianapolis, also the 44th Tennessee, and we've become really good friends with them. So sometimes they'll invite a few of us to do their events with them that the federal unit isn't going, so I've got some Confederate gear now. This is actually a Columbus Depot jacket, which is Confederate with the I infantry buttons. And all these are wool, and they're all lined. And you wear these in the summer, in 85 degrees, it doesn't matter. That's what you were issued, because wool breathes. Yeah, don't believe that. Actually, the only reason they use wool was it's because it's the one material that can get wet and still keep you warm. So that's why wool was so common. Again, this is a Confederate Richmond Depot jacket. This would have been more typical of the Confederate soldiers in the East, where this is typical of the Confederate soldiers in the West. And you can see, this is more typical gray. This is what's the butternut. This was, they wore the browns and the butternut colored jackets because their dyes were not uniform. The dyes that they'd use in Virginia were not the same dyes they were using in Alabama. So they would do whatever they had to do, whatever color it came out, that's what they got. It didn't matter. It wasn't about the uniforms. We wear the wool pants, and like I said, underneath that is your period underwear. So you have drawers under the wool that you're also wearing all summer long in the heat and everything else. So it can be really hot, but you get used to it. You have a lot of fun. I love it. I couldn't think of a better hobby. I think it's important that we don't forget history, that there's people out here who are willing to do honor to these people and not let their memory be forgotten. So, questions? Anybody? Yes?
With the bayonets, am I thinking of the wrong thing, or was that what saved Little Round Top, was that? was
The
it
bayonet
20th
charge?
Maine? Was
Right,
it
that was-
bayonet
Maine.
charge?
Yeah, that was one section of Little Round Top. That was all the way on the far left. If you really get into reading about history, yes. Chamberlain was very important, and he did a great thing, but that was one very small part of a very large battle. They had run out of ammo at the time, and it was an amazing thing for him to order a bayonet charge. You just wouldn't think, and again, the reason it worked, it was going downhill, and everybody was worn out. They had been fighting all day, and they did not expect it. It was just that suddenly they looked up, and Union soldiers are screaming down the hill at them with bayonets, and like I said, you're not sticking around, you're gone. And so they took off. A lot of Gettysburg, the huge part of the battle that's overlooked is Culp's Hill on the other end, which was a gigantic part of the battle. Really, really important, and it's overshadowed these days because of modern media and the movie Gettysburg and Chamberlain and these things that have come up. People have kind of lost track of some of what really went on and the importance of other parts of that battle.
If, maybe we can hold off for questions so April can get a chance, because we're starting to run out of time. I want to get everybody in.
Okay. Okay, I'm April Nichols, and like he said, I portray his wife, Ann Wheeler. And after his passing, you don't hear much about me anymore. You can't find too much in any research, anything. So we're just thinking, because a lot of women and men, after all that stress that we go through, might have, I call it, go off the deep end, kind of, because you don't hear too much more about me and hear more about my kids. And a lot of people don't give us women credit, and even in today's society, we don't get credit for everything we have to do. Cooking years ago was not like today. You can't just drive through McDonald's or whatever. We cooked on heavy cast iron pans. You finish breakfast, next thing you know it, you're preparing dinner. A lot of times it was, you don't even get a middle lunch. You got more, I call it like a snack, or you just went on to dinner. When our husbands went off to war, some of us had to go with our family. Because they worked for other people, we were going to lose our house. Some of us went back with our other family and worked on the farms. So we had to take care of the farm, do our husband's job, of course. So there's another extra added job. We still had to take care of the kids as we usually did. Plus, we had to cook and feed everybody. Sometimes we had more people coming to our house to help out for farm help. Because Indiana had a lot of farmers. So when our husbands went off, we had to maintain the farm. So some of the daughters at a young age would have to go off into the mills and work and bring the money home. And us ourselves would have to go out and run the farm as our parents that came back to live with us would take care of the children. And we would have children till we cannot bear them anymore. Children were an asset years ago. You would just keep having them and having them and having them, unless your husband went off to work, it is. And you would have generations and families. It was nothing to have somebody that could be your mother as your sister. And you would just keep having them and having them till you couldn't no more. I mean, because that was, especially boys, that was extra help on the farm. You know, women, the girls would learn to sew, do all the domestic stuff, until times got hard, they had to go out and work and bring the money back in. And plus, we had to sew. Among everything else we were doing, we had to sew to provide us with clothing. Plus, go out in the field with 5 layers of clothes on. And our first layer would normally be your pantaloons, which are underwear, or drawers, they call them. And then you would go to your corset, petticoat, or your hoop. Your petticoat, like she has on, if you want to stand up, Mom, she's wearing a camp dress or known as a work dress. You do not wear a hoop with it because you can't cook. You can't bend over. You get into the flames. You go up. A lot of times they were 3/4 inch sleeves or short sleeve for working. And the apron I wore is a pin apron. You could tuck it in, or they came up and they pinned on you to keep your clothes better. This apron has extra pieces here for the reason of keeping your clothes cleaner, because it would go around, and also wiping hands, because you have more to wipe. And what I'm wearing would be considered a day dress. They had seven different types of dresses. You have your camp or your work dress. You have your day dress. There was a walking dress. There was a riding dress. There was a tea dress. There was a ball gown or party gown, or they had several names. And a lot of people called their tea dress your Sunday best that you would wear to church. The people, if you were wealthy, you would change several times a day. If you weren't, you just owned maybe 3 dresses, which was like a tea dress, your work dress or camp dress, a casual day dress, and maybe a tea dress that you would wear as a walking, going out, ball gown, kind of, you really wouldn't go to balls, but it would be your Sunday best. And most of the time you would find a lot of mending if you weren't in the upper class or wealthy. Wealthy woman never left the house without a parasol, because suntan was a sign of not being wealthy. So you couldn't have any kind of tan. They did not wear makeup. Makeup was more for the, what would you call them now? Wilder women? I don't know how to say it with kids here, but you wouldn't wear makeup. Wealthy women did not wear makeup. And I'm trying to think what else. Oh, the number one thing they carried in their purse at all times, you never left the house without it, was smelling salt. Because women had a tendency to faint a lot, because you'd have a corset on, pulled very tight, and all the layers that you would have on, you have a tendency of fainting. So you never left the house without your smelling salts. And the corsets, an average size waist back then was a size 19, which our average size is a size 10, which is a 34-inch waist for a woman. So imagine what they did to their insides by pulling this. Granted, there was some with 13 and 12-inch waist, but an average woman was a 19-inch waist. And that was pulling everything in. And that just shows you how much, we have grown in the years with all our food additives and stuff, and they basically ate from the earth, healthier foods.
The average Civil War soldier was 5'5", 135.
The average woman was 5 foot tall.
They were tiny. You look at their uniforms.
That's what, if you were my height, you were a giant. Just an average. Of course, there were shorter, maybe a little taller, but an average woman was normally 5 foot tall. Yeah, and shoes, you wouldn't believe it, were tiny. This is, it's heeled so it looks bigger, but your toes didn't go all the way down to the end either.
Aren't they like around 4?
Yeah, that's what this is. Actually, this is a little bit after the Civil War, because in the Civil War their heels were chunkier, more of a block than this. So this is right after the Civil War, plus doing everything else we had to do if we wanted to make ourselves beautiful. This is a curling iron to do your little ringlets. And you also had to heat it, make sure it's not hot enough, you know, to burn your hair, singe your hair. This is what an actual Civil War curling iron was, to make the round little ringlets. Little girls had to have dresses covering their kneecaps. The young girls, a lot of times you would see their pantaloons hanging out. Even boys wore dresses, especially babies. And they wore them to like pawing stage and stuff. But they had little bloomers too they would wear. And most of the women. The women pantaloons were actually, I was surprised, were crotchless. They were not sewn in the thing. And that was for all the layers you have on. If you were wealthy, you had people to help you lift your skirt. They put the little porcelain potty on a chair with no back, and they would help you lift, and you would go. And also, women also have your time, and it was easier access to get, they used rags. And that was another reasoning for them to be not sewed. And that was surprising to me because you never heard that. I didn't. And if you're making authentic patterns from the Civil War, they're all made that way. None of them instruct you to sew it up. So, trying to think what else here. Like they both said, we're new at this and I'm just learning, and the only reason I got into it is my son, Nicholas, and his friend wanted to be Civil War people for Halloween. They told me that in January, and I said, oh, that'll change 50 million times before October. Well, as you see, they're in their Halloween costumes. And in the beginning, we were in the Indiana, the 4th Indiana, the artillery. And then Mike started this up. And it's closer, Crown Point. I'm from Lowell. So they wanted to do that, and I had known Mike, and he did this, so I'm like, we went to their little picnic, and here we are. They were into it, but I wasn't at the time, and he didn't want to do Boy Scouts, so I said, okay, I'll be your Civil War mom instead of your den mom now. So I got stuck doing this. It's just me and my son. No, my husband's not into it. He's just my Civil War husband. And women, you don't want to have 2 husbands. No, one's bad enough, but 2. But no, we all have to portray somebody in our unit. So since he's not married, I got stuck his wife. And I have 2 boys, so they're his son. We are trying to recruit somebody with a daughter that would like to join. A father with a daughter. Come and join. I'll take her as Alice, my daughter. And of course, my son portrays the men as children. And some of the boys would lie about being 18 to get into the war. They were mostly 16. There are some 11-year-olds in that as drummers. And, okay. So if you guys want to look at anything or ask questions, you can.
Real fast, just to show the determination of a Indiana woman, a Hoosier. This is a book, Harvest Fields to Death, which is about the 20th Indiana by Craig L. Dunn. We have contacted him, and hopefully we're going to get him at one of our living histories to have a book signing and everything. But here's a little paragraph he wrote. The wife of Daniel Beiser, Company E, was so lonesome for her man that she made the long journey from Newport, Indiana to Virginia on foot. Experiencing far more prolonged hardship than her husband had experienced on Hatteras Island. This was proof positive that a Hoosier woman was just as tough as a Missouri mule. When she set her mind to it, Miss Beiser was the talk of the camp for her loyal and heroic journey. So, but again, I'd like to thank, very, very excellent book.
One thing,
get involved.
What's that?
one thing,
Oh, yeah, she talks me into everything.
folks, we have 10 minutes and they throw us out. So I want to thank Mike and April and